Okay. I'd like to call the meeting to order and ask, I think we have a quorum, so ask that we take roll.
Buchanan?
Here. Oops, here.
Buchanan here. Adams? Here. Evans, Fuhrer? Here. Harkey?
Okay, I'd like to take the consent calendar first.
So moved. Second.
Okay, any questions or discussions? Take the vote on it then.
Buchanan?
Aye.
Adams?
Aye.
Adams, aye. Evans? Fuhrer?
Aye.
Fuhrer, aye. 3-0.
And I'd like to move to item 2740, Department of Motor Vehicles. And we'd like to start with, obviously, issue one, the budget request related to the driving under the influence new bills that were passed this last year.
Sure. Good afternoon, Ms. Chair and members of the committee. I'm Matt Paulin. I'm the Chief Deputy Director of the Department of Motor Vehicles. The agenda lays out pretty well the nature of these two budget requests. The first request is to implement best practices in our DUI access system. We have about 4 different systems. This would combine them all into one so our staff could more easily and readily access said system. The second request is to implement 2 pieces of legislation related to DUI and IIDs, and we ask for your aye vote.
Thank you. I have just one question related to the positions, and I know we have an expert here with us to assist you. But when I looked at the cost in the bills, and I'm comparing it to what we have here, on AB 91, the $300,000 startup cost for programming is consistent with the fiscal analysis in the bill. And then going on, the $500,000 to $800,000 is consistent. But could you tell me why we need 19 positions? What they're going to do in the 3 counties where we have the pilot? I mean, that's roughly 6 employees per county.
Madam Chair, Dennis Clear, I'm the legislative officer. What we're anticipating is about 50,000 additional transactions. What this pilot program does actually in 4 counties is it requires all DUI, after DUI conviction, anyone to get their license back has to install an ignition interlock. And unlike Mr. Huff's bill, where it's optional, this is now a mandatory requirement to reinstate your license. So the workload is directly driven by the number of historical DUI convictions in those 4 counties. So what we have estimated, what this will mean to the department is additional workload, essentially, is to handle the verification. It's paperwork to verify that they had the device installed. Frankly, it's talk time to explain to them the new requirements, and then to process the update to the records to make sure that everyone understands, particularly law enforcement, when they stop someone with this now restricted license, that they're meeting all the requirements. So it's directly.
So we need 4 people full-time to do that? I mean, we're expecting that kind of workload on a daily basis?
Yes, ma'am. And particularly in Los Angeles County, frankly. I mean, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio, but the number of convictions in Los Angeles County is much more than Tulare County, for example.
Are you then going to staff up, or are you just going, or?
Oh, we're staffing up.
So are you going to staff up based on workload then? Are you going to hire all the people on day one?
We've started hiring already in anticipation of July 1 when the program kicks off, but we'll actually be doing the hiring as the convictions occur, because it's all based on activity after July 1.
And then for the repeat offenders, Huff's bill, SB 598, the number of staffing positions for that is 3 positions to implement that statewide.
Right. You're right. There's more counties, but the number of convictions is much lower. It's only for repeat offenders, which, thank goodness, is a much smaller number. And because it's optional, we estimated a percentage of how many people would take advantage of installing this when the other option is to wait out their suspension.
So we have 58 counties, right?
Correct.
So you're anticipating 16 for the 4 counties that are going to be the pilot on AB 91, and I assume that staffing will also take care of SB 598. correct?
Right.
So for the remaining 54 counties, then, we're saying that the equivalent of 3 people or an increase in just hours will be able to handle the interlock devices for the
Yes,
second-time offenders. Okay. Anyone else have any questions?
No, I just want to say very quickly, Madam Chair, one of the important aspects of this program, besides its anticipated efficacy, is from a financial standpoint, the federal government provided more than $300,000 of additional startup funds for this, and then it's a fully fee-supported program. So no hit to the general fund. And again, I want to express my appreciation to all the parties involved, from Chris Murphy in the Office of Traffic Safety to NHTSA to the DMV for coordinating this with the CHP. So it's a program that should be completely self-sustaining with no general fund impact and save lives. And I will move the item.
Okay. Is there any further discussion or questions? Okay, can we take the roll?
Buchanan,
Aye.
Adams, Evans, Fuhrer,
Aye.
Harkey. 4-0.
Okay, we'll move to issue number 2, the new facility leases for field offices.
Again, Ms. Buchanan, this request is to replace 4 of our aged space-limited facilities. We ask for your aye vote.
Member Adams.
The incorporation of the Lancaster and Palmdale offices into one office makes sense geographically. I understand that. What is that going to mean in terms of the impact? And what I'm specifically asking is, will the new facility have the capacity from day one to accommodate both communities who are used to being served by 2 separate facilities?
That's certainly our intention. We're going to combine the staff that run those separate field offices today into one larger field office. It will be our largest field office in the state when it's constructed, but it will have the capacity to serve the area that it does today.
Incidentally, where specifically is it located?
We haven't determined that. That'll be if we're awarded the budget request, and we'll move forward with our typical site search procedure and find an adequate site.
And what is the expectation as it relates to the buildings that you're currently in? Are your current facilities leased facilities as well?
That's a good question. I think Lancaster may be state-owned and Palmdale may be leased. I'm not sure what the current
Just curious
status
because
is.
we have a lot of state-owned properties and we seem to have a surplus of them. They never get off our books, and it has real cost to the state. So I'm wondering if you could research that and let me know. I'd appreciate it.
Sure, not a problem.
Are there any other questions?
I'd move the bill.
Okay, is there a second? Yeah. Okay, can we take the roll?
Buchanan,
Aye.
Adams,
Aye.
Evans, Fuhrer, Harkey. 4-0.
Okay, and your last issue, the third one, connecting the California veterans to federal benefits.
Madam Chair, as the analysis mentioned, we've looked at the Florida model. I think one of the challenges in trying to do something like Florida did is that the cost of it, frankly. For us to add another checkoff box or to ask all of our customers if they're a veteran and then start building that file and recording it, there is some cost to that. And we've also, in discussion with Veterans Affairs, tried to identify their end of it, which frankly would be a challenge for them too. So what we like is the staff recommendation to work with them and look at some administrative possible solutions. We've talked to them about both the registration process, the driver's license process, our in-person customers, our mail customers, and our online customers. So we're trying to help them narrow down their focus so we don't really spend too much trying to do too large an effort when the returns probably may not be there. Because we do know some of the target audience for them is the veterans that has somewhat fallen on the bad times and that is eligible for federal assistance, meaning food stamps, housing, mental health support, all of those services. Not all of our customers really are going to fit that bill, and not all the veterans receive. So we believe this is a good approach to work pretty narrowly with Veterans Affairs and figure out the best way to kind of achieve our mutual goals. So we think the MOU is a good idea.
Are there any questions? Motion?
I would move the staff recommendation.
Okay. Second, can we take the roll?
Buchanan,
Aye.
Adams, Evans, Fuhrer, Harkey. 4-0.
Thank you for your time today. Okay, we're going to move to item 2665, the High Speed Rail Authority.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairwoman.
Good
Members
afternoon.
of the subcommittee. I'm Judge Quentin Kopp, a member of the Authority Board and former chairman. And with me is our acting executive director, Carrie Porvahidi. And let the record reflect that we have read both the LAO's report and the subcommittee's staff report. And with your permission, let me make about 6, 7 general comments with respect to the status of the project, and then, of course, stand prepared to answer with Ms. Porvahidi's augmentation such questions or further detail as you want. And I will try to, in a general summary, avoid details that bog down the subcommittee's work, because you can go on and on and on with details. And some of the status information, so to speak, is probably known to all, or at least most of you. This is an important year for the project. All of the years from now on are important years. We're still at a relatively early stage, and I underscore the word relatively because it's a many-year project of the entire development. Each of the 9 sections, which comprise the first phase of the project from San Francisco to Anaheim, is in the project level design and environmental review process. Construction will not start on any of them for approximately another 2 years. We have, however, some deadlines. Not statutory deadlines so much, although, of course, the California Environmental Quality Act has its own deadlines that are inherent in the environmental analysis process. But now I refer to deadlines that are a part of the so-called American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, or the stimulus bill. As you probably know, some 4 or 5 months ago, the Secretary of Transportation of the United States announced that we would be the recipient of a grant of $2.25 billion, which is the largest grant given to any applicant for $8 billion associated with high-speed rail and conventional rail under that federal legislation, and another $900 million for existing rail in California, with the idea that that would connect to high-speed rail. There are deadlines for the consummation of that grant. The first deadline is September 30th, 2011 for environmental clearance, meaning certification of a final EIR for the 4 particular sections, geographical sections: Anaheim to Los Angeles, Bakersfield to Fresno, Fresno to Merced, and San Jose to San Francisco, with items which were deemed eligible and were part of the grant. The second deadline is September 30th, 2012, and September 30th, as you know, is the end of the federal fiscal year. And the statute, the Act of Congress, requires that each of these items be the subject of obligation, meaning contractual obligation, by that date. And then the actual use of the money must be completed by September 30th of 2017. It's axiomatic that delay costs money. I can assure you, however, that we are on schedule. As the LAO and the staff report, I think, note, sure, some are farther ahead than others. Of those 4 sections I've identified, Anaheim to Los Angeles is about 61% in terms of reaching the so-called ROD, Record of Decision, which is required under federal law. And the other 3 are about 33.33% towards that goal. But as I think those exhibits or some of these schedules show, they're all going to wind up about the same in 2011 as far as certification of the EIR and the EIS, which is also part of the requisite process, are concerned. Now, we're not quite, I suppose, at a crossroads. I think we've really passed a crossroads where we were a small planning entity with about 6 to 9.5 positions allocated in the budget for many years, to where we now are a larger entity with much more responsibility. To accomplish that responsibility has several consequences. One of them is additional personnel, because all of the engineering and the environmental analysis work is being done with private contracting. It's not being done with state employees. That means the burden of making sure that that work is done on time, that it's done properly. And that requires state personnel. And as you know from the reports, I'm sure, we had KMPG, which is a worldwide known management consulting firm, analyze the authority last year and the authority's charge from the legislature and the voters and issue a report. And that then led to the request, in the requested appropriation for 2010, 2011, for about 25 new positions. Now, I realize that the positions requested in the budget request have not been tied to those that are described and recommended in that KMPG report, and that is in the process of being cured and will be cured. But it is crucial that we obtain, for example, a chief financial officer, a program management oversight personnel, and it's tough to do that with a salary scale that's a part of state personnel practices, and therefore that led to the request for exempt positions. There's been a note to the effect of a recommendation that those such positions be defined in statute as far as not just responsibilities are concerned, but also as far as compensation is concerned, which of course makes sense. I also want to know that the first goal in 2010-11 is to support with appropriations the environmental review work that's currently in process. And that's in process not just for the 4 sections I've identified, but all the sections in that first phase from Anaheim to San Francisco, and also the commencement of such work in the other sections, from Los Angeles to San Diego on the south, and from Merced to Sacramento on the north, and also for the connections through the Altamont Pass, which were part of Proposition 1A's appropriation by the voters of, or approval by the voters of $950 million for that purpose. Let me talk for a moment also about the business plan, which has been the subject of discussion for probably the last 2 years in the legislature and in both houses. We completed the 3rd business plan since 2007 and issued it December 15, 2009. We also have issued, I think 2 weeks ago, an addendum to that business plan. A business plan changes. It changes with developments in the project. And we will be issuing a business plan at least within the next 3 months, an additional business plan. And there is nothing illogical about, there are a couple of requests. One was for an annual report to the legislature, and then I think that was transformed into a report every 2 years. But that is entirely consistent with the requirements and the proscriptions of AB 3034, which was enacted September 2009, and part of which formed the predicate for Proposition 1A in that November 2008 bond issue. Enacted in, I said 2009, enacted in September of 2008. Let me talk for a moment also about rider forecasts, which are a complicated, sometimes perplexing, and sometimes vexing enterprise. In answer to comments that were made, we have entered into some agreements with UC Davis, not some agreements, with UC Davis and with Caltrans to produce an updated statewide ridership model, not just for California high-speed rail, but also for other public transportation operators in the state of California. And we have signed a contract with the University of California at Berkeley's ITS, Institute of Transportation Studies, to conduct an additional peer review of the current ridership forecast, which was part of the December 15, 2009 publication of the business plan, as well as the model that's being promulgated by UC Davis and by Caltrans. Let me just conclude. I think I covered the subject matter of reporting. As you know, the Streets and Highways Code, pursuant to AB 3034, has a set of strict requirements and, again, proscriptions, including a bar against spending any money on any section until certified by the director of the Department of Finance and whoever is the chairwoman or chairman of the Joint Legislative Budget Committee of the legislature that money to finish it is available. And there are limitations on how much can be spent on administration, how much can be spent on planning, and not simply because it's the law, but because it is our intent and solemn promise to ensure that each of those provisions is complied with not only to the letter of the law, but also to the spirit of the law. A couple of additional points should be noted, and I don't want to insult anybody's intelligence by reminding the members of the subcommittee that the appropriation requested will emanate from the proceeds of Proposition 1A's approved general obligation bond, and not from the general fund of the state of California, which was true this fiscal year that we're in now. We also, upon reflection and at the suggestion of several people, cut the amount requested for right-of-way acquisition and only what I'll characterize as the most precious right-of-way, from $750 million down to $250 million for that purpose. And the entire requested budget, with that action, with a couple of other modifications, a technical correction and the like, is $461,668,000. And the original request back last fall, when you're trying to figure this out, was somewhere around $958 million. So it's been cut about 50%. And as each so-called federal dollar from ARRA is received, that will be used, and not the dollar which might otherwise be spent from the general obligation bond issue. So that concludes my general summary. I note the presence of the author of the famous AB 3034, Assemblywoman Galgiani, here, and I don't know what the protocol is these days because it's been about 11 years since I was here, but you may want to invite comments from her.
I would suggest that maybe, since we have 5 issues that we have on the agenda here, if it's okay with you, that we take these one issue at a time, and we'll let you go ahead and introduce them and get any LAO comments, and then have the members here ask any questions that they have. So the first issue that is on the agenda is an overview of the current funding and activities. I know that some of that was covered by Judge Kopp, but I just want to give you the opportunity to share any information that you'd like with us.
Correct. As far as some of the funding activities that have been going on and the reduction request for the right-of-way reduction of the $500 some million. Please note that some of these funds will be bond funded, some of the activities will be bond funded, some of the activities will be ARRA funded. So there is a less impact on the Proposition 1A than is as Judge Kopp described. We did do the KPMG report, which did an assessment of the organization, looked at it from more of a management structure, did not look at more the support staff requirements of the authority. When you looked at our BCP that we submitted in the fall, it was prior to the KPMG report being issued, and therefore there is that discrepancy between what the BCP report was and the KPMG. I have sent staff a organizational charts that does some reconciliation. I'm in the process of putting together a staffing plan which will address more of the issues in a more narrative form as well as a tabular form.
Assemblymember Galgiani, do you have any comments you'd like to add to that?
Yes, I do on that item. We actually have a bill in place on the Senate side, Assembly Bill 289, that implements the ARRA funds, but also is a placeholder for the staff positions to describe in any greater detail what's decided upon from the authority. Thank you.
And Eric, do you have any comments from the LAO's office on this?
Judge Kopp, Eric Thronson with the Legislative Analyst's Office. Judge Kopp did a great job of summarizing a lot of important parts of what's going on with the high-speed rail. We would like to comment on the addendum to the business plan that was released the last 2 weeks. Was another great improvement, more information, which is always valuable. We do still have some concerns, particularly with the discussion about revenue guarantees and operating subsidies, but we can, we'll continue to work with the High-Speed Rail Authority on that. In addition, with the ARA funding, our understanding is that the money has to be fully obligated by September of 2011, which includes the environmental process, as Judge Kopp had replied. The FRA, who is administering the program, are making this up as they go along as well, and so things are changing all the time. There could be additional information that we're unaware of that the authority may be aware of. But we do believe that as soon as the authority is able to, they should report to the legislature on some of the questions, how the money will be spent and how the federal restrictions will be placed on the money. For example, will the federal government require the money to be split evenly amongst the segments, or will the authority have the ability to switch the money as necessary? How the money will be matched, how the federal government will require us to match that, if it's a dollar for dollar, or if it happens to be, we've spent X amount of money on a certain corridor, and therefore, we can apply that amount of federal dollars to that corridor. As this information comes available, it will definitely help us, or help the legislature make decisions on how to what money to appropriate. But as Judge Kopp said, in last year's budget bill, there was language that said, to the extent possible, as federal dollars were received, they can be replaced. They can replace bond dollars, and with that kind of budget bill language in the budget year bill, we could continue to do that activity.
We agree.
Okay. Are there any questions? Sally Verharkey.
Yeah, I have gotten into this strictly by default, so to speak, when I'm looking at the state's financing issues or debt. And although I understand that bond monies are used for this, the debt service on those bond monies does come from the general fund. And the people of California had certain understandings when they approved this. And the biggest questions that I'm working with Ms. Galgiani to try to get the reporting up to speed, to try to get investment grade reports coming from the committee, to try to instill the oversight. I just find it really amazing that we are going full speed ahead with other people's money, so to speak, the people of California, and the quote-unquote free money that we're all paying for from Washington on a plan that we're making up as we go along, because we don't really know what this is going to be, what it's going to cost. There's problems on the peninsula I discovered once I raised this, which was strictly from a financial perspective. I raised these issues. I wasn't looking at the project. I've never paid attention to the project. I just, was looking, can we afford it? And what is it really going to cost? And that being said, when we're, eking out little bits to fund local transportation, and we're actually taking local transportation dollars here at the state instead of giving them to the local communities. We've actually borrowed them. We've deferred them. We need construction for school buildings and whatnot that we're not able to really meet. We've got a ton of needs in this state, and some prioritizing is going to be very, very important. And so I'm working very hard with Ms. Galgiani and with others that have all of a sudden raised a lot of concerns. AB 289 came up, which is accepting the stimulus funds, but we're not really sure, if I'm listening to the LAO, and I'm asking you, we're not really sure if I'm listening to the LAO under what conditions those can be used. When do you think you'll know that?
When the FRA or Secretary of Transportation issues some more instructions and directions. I don't like to use the phrase, with all deference, that they're making it up as they go along. I assume that it's an orderly and logical process, but we're not part of that. So we've got to wait till that occurs. But here's how I look at it, Madam Assemblywoman. I repeat that we're still at a relatively early stage. People will say, when am I going to be able to take the train? This and that. That's why I made the comment that probably construction starts in about 2 years. And most of those sections, probably, they range from 30 miles Anaheim to L.A. to about, 110 miles from Fresno to Merced. But they'll probably take in the neighborhood of 2 years to complete. We've got a pretty good schedule as far as the environmental analysis concerned, section by section. That's been made available, hasn't it? And I would recommend that you use that in answering questions, answering your own questions.
I have been. Thank you.
Yeah. It's pretty good, and we've added a revised monthly program management report. There were complaints that the program management report was something that could be understood by an engineer, but not by you or me, unless you're an engineer. I don't know. I'm not. And that has been revised, so that's available every month, not just to members of the authority board or authority staff. And it's a tedious process, and I don't blame you for being frustrated in some respects. But the people of California have spoken. We've got an administration at the Department of Transportation, which is bursting with pronouncements of building high-speed rail throughout the United States.
I understand that,
and
I don't
California.
Interrupt you, but
No,
I'm
that's
going to
okay.
take this liberty.
But I mean, my basic answer is that I can't answer until I hear from the FRA.
Right, but there's more issues to address.
Sure.
I understand that you have your limitations. Is there any plan or any at any point where any one of these corridors is determined to be too expensive to build?
No, not at this point.
Okay, because
not at this point.
We're always going back to what the people approved $9 billion, of which they thought would be no subsidies, no additional costs, and
Right.
they'd be off and rolling for this train. And it was approved by 52%, which is not overwhelming, especially including last year, the vote turnout. A lot of young people.
52.7. Okay. I go to sleep at night thinking 52.7.
Yeah, that's fine. But they also had some assurances made, and so understanding what this project overall is going to cost, I think is going to be very important. I think it's going to be very important that you determine at what point what you spend in each corridor. What are we really talking about? Because if we tunnel, that's doubling, tripling, maybe quadrupling the cost. I have no idea, but you can probably better estimate. I've read estimates. If there's going to be a subsidy or a local cost sharing, at what point, who cost shares and how does that work? Does that work county by county for their facility that they have? Or is that a cost sharing whether you have one or not? Because I know that...
No, it'll be, as you define it, locality or region by region.
Right, and also who pays for, once you arrive at the stops that you're supposed to arrive at, who pays for the transportation to get from here to there if you're going to use this? There's a lot of concerns that could fall on the locals, because you could build this train, you could tax locally. the state could be paying a tremendous amount to build to everybody's particular preference. And since we, in private business, and I don't know anywhere but government, quite honestly, that ever goes off on a plan when they don't know what exactly they're going to have to spend. So I'm asking you to try to figure out what is the maximum that you're going to be spending on this plan, corridor to corridor, and then to come back with some, you know, some point where if it doesn't make sense, we cut and run. Because this is a huge, this could grow exponentially in costs, which we have seen in Boston, and we have seen, you know, all over, really. I mean, they're always more, it's always more than you think. So I think we need to know, if we're going to honor the peoples of California's wish and their approval, what exactly we're talking about. And be direct with those communities involved as to exactly what it's going to cost them. I think those things are very, very important. And at what point they decide that maybe they don't want the system or they do want the system.
Can I just take a little part of that?
Sure.
And I've made a note with your main point about Corridor X winding up with a very high cost, which makes it impractical, if not illegal. But in terms of the localities and regions, there's got to be a lot of talking over the next 18 months to 2 years, because you start with the premise that's the law. Under the Streets and Highways Code, you can't have any more than 24 stations in the whole state. Now, that disappoints some people. I can tell you, the city of Visalia isn't going to have a station. That decision's been made as part of the alternative analysis in the California Environmental Quality Act process. In the Streets and Highways Code, there's a provision you can't have any station between Gilroy and Merced. That makes the mayor of Los Banos unhappy. I have a city I won't name where the mayor calls me a week or two ago with some comment to the effect that she heard that this city has to pay for its station. The answer to that is, except for those cities which are identified in the Streets and Highways Code, that one section, I'm sorry I didn't bring the code with me, but which has the cities of Los Angeles, the bigger cities, you don't know if there'll be a station in a given city. There may be a city that doesn't want a station where you are analyzing it as part of the CEQA process. And finally, the business plan contemplates that there will be money raised from localities and regions. The easiest I can think of, and Ms. Galgiani can probably, you're closer, she's from the Central Valley, I think of Fresno. Now, Fresno would like, I think, a pretty good station. And what typically happens in other countries is you sell the development rights in, around, and over a station. And that's part of our financing plan. I've forgotten how much. I think it's about $7 billion from those sources, both private and public. So that's got to all be discussed. It's got to be negotiated. And it's got to be part of the environmental process. Because maybe, let's say you have 4 alternatives in a given section, and maybe the preferred alternative is a station in City X. Well, then you got to get to the question of what kind of work is needed, how much will it cost, and who will pay for it. So I know that it's not a some certain answer, but it's the truth of the matter. You're going to have to negotiate and do a lot of talking.
I would like to add to that as well. In my district, in fact, as we speak, they're having a meeting on the alternative analysis routes. So we're actually competing for the heavy maintenance facility in the Central Valley. And so cities like Fresno, Merced, Bakersfield, Madera, and the like are putting in their applications to try to secure the maintenance facility. So in respect to local funding going toward that, for example, in the city of Merced, we have offered in the neighborhood of 200 acres of free, almost free land to lease back to the High-Speed Rail Authority for $1 a year because we own that property. It was an old, it was Castle Air Force Base. So that's one example of land that's being offered. The city of Fresno that's competing for the heavy maintenance facility, they're proposing to allocate a half part of their quarter-cent sales tax directly toward the purchase of land for the maintenance facility. And then we're also at the same time looking at where we're putting stations, and so the local governments are looking at existing stations and where they own right-of-way, where that right-of-way could be donated as their match. So those are examples of, with the exception of the sales tax in Fresno, those are examples of resources that are already owned by the localities that are being offered forward as a match where it won't be any detriment to the local government at all, but rather it would allow them to participate and provide the local match. I also, you raised the concern about, a segment being too expensive to build. In the addendum to the the December 15th, 2009 business plan, it talks about the fact that the $42.6 billion figure for the full build-out of the system has contingency amounts in there, and for those to protect against cost overruns, and for those costs that would be more standardized, the contingency overrun is around 20%, and for those where there'd be greater variables, it's at about 30% that they've allowed for. So that's built into the plan. I will tell you that we have one company from overseas that is very interested in being the operator. I know that there are probably others as well, but I have spoken with one directly that is proposing to finance 40% private investment toward the project, where our business plan relies on receiving 25% from the private sector. So as Judge Kopp explained, this will change as we go and as we learn more. We received almost twice as much as any other state, and it's because of the confidence that the FRA has in California's plan. We actually have 135 senior managers and planners involved in the project that have been involved in billions of dollars of construction worldwide on high-speed train systems. So we have the best and brightest talent that we're utilizing for our plan now. And we have memorandums of understanding with 7 countries. So it's not just California moving forward alone. We're moving forward with partners who actually have experience in, again, building infrastructure, the billions of dollars of high-speed train infrastructure.
You brought up a point. You have received $2.25 billion.
Mm-hmm.
How much was the request?
Request was $4.7 billion.
Okay, so you got basically 50% of what you asked for. What would happen if you only got 50% of what you're anticipating here in federal funding?
Because you had
total?
something like 48 other applications from all over the country.
Well, that's why I'm asking the question.
And guess what? There were about 25 grants, and some of them were simply to gussy up existing rail, maybe allow a speed to go from 50 miles an hour to 60 miles an hour. Florida's relevant. Florida claims, well, it does own almost all the right-of-way from Orlando to Tampa. It's about 85 miles. Florida got half of what we got. And Florida maintains that it's ready to start. Well, it hasn't started. And Again, they're carving up $8 billion, Madam Assemblywoman. There are a lot of members of Congress, 435 plus 100.
That's why I bring it up. I'm questioning whether we're going to actually be able to meet what we get from the federal government. Now just
give you one set of facts.
Well, you just speak so well and you're just so eloquent. But allow me to continue here. There's a new publication, or there's a publication. The bond buyers talking about this. Everybody's talking about high-speed rail because it is a big Wall Street financing opportunity, and so everybody's making a lot of money on these deals, and they like it. So they're talking about. But it's one of the private versus public funding is, will the private sector actually finance the building of high-speed rail, which is stated here that Art Gazzetti, the chief policy advisor for American Public Transportation Association, says if the private sector could finance these things in a profitable way, they haven't done that. The answer is you can't. In the end, it's going to be the public that pays, and that's what I'm saying. That's why we need to know what the public is going to be paying here. Because we know private companies, and he goes on to say, will invest a share and the financial risk of high-speed rail only insofar as they could get a reasonable return, which we know. Nobody's going to invest money from the private sector unless they're going to make money on it. And they're going to have that all calculated out in advance. So we need to know, firmly before we start getting really into this. And you said construction is not going to begin for a couple of years. And understand, but the people of California were promised no subsidy. This would be it. This is your total investment. And I'm a little concerned that's not so.
Let me just cover two of those points. One is the statute prohibit any operational subsidy. That's the law, flatly. Now, second part of the major part of your comments deal with the capital investment part. There's a conundrum because typically the private money doesn't appear until the project is farther along. So, for example, we put out what's called request for expressions of interest and got back in 2008 28 responses. Equipment. We want to participate financially. We supply equipment. Construction. We operate high-speed trains. There were 5 outfits talked about private investment, money. And they're still interested. The 4 of them are still in business. 1 isn't. And since the bond issue passed, number 1. Number 2, that ARA grant, there have been how many? I think there are about another 15 expressions of interest. Now, I can't tell you here we've signed them up on the dotted line. They're going to provide such and such number of trains in consideration of X% off net operating revenue. But it's a conundrum because I don't blame you for wanting to solidify it.
I'd like to try and keep the agenda moving because we could talk about some of
but it's interesting, isn't it?
It is interesting, and some of the issues, if you go down, I think in many respects repeat themselves in the other 4 issue areas. But I think if I could maybe provide a summary of I think where the point Assemblymember Harkey wants to make, and it's this, is that we've passed a $9 billion bond, and the people of California clearly said they'd like to see high-speed rail in this state. And passing that bond gives us an obligation because we are paying it back with taxpayer funds. We're going to, it's going to cost us probably $650 million a year for 30 years to pay off those bonds. So we have a responsibility to those taxpayers to be transparent and to be judicious with the funds we spend and to do all we can to deliver the project. The project itself relies not just on the $9 billion in state funding, But currently, based on your addendum, it assumes that we're going to have between 17 and 19 billion total in federal grants, 4 to 5 billion in local grants, and another 10 to 12 billion dollars in private funding. And there's another page on your addendum that shows, as you were referring to, the ramping up process. We know that all that money isn't going to be spent at the same time. You know, when I look, I know everyone can't see this but you've got the blue where you expect the private funding to start kicking in 2015. And so, you know, some of the work we have here, I have a little bit of a hard time understanding, and I don't want to go into that now because I've got contract values and then totals that either exceed dramatically or less, and so I'd like to, maybe we can take time to go over that before we actually get into the budget. But I think, you know, the point is, and we can talk more later about a risk position when we start talking about the positions, but the point is that within our comprehensive plan that you have, and the reporting that needs to be done to the legislature on a periodic basis, whether it's every 2 years, every year, or, you know, periodically, we have to have a way to measure the milestones and the progress and whether or not we're going to be able to execute the plan fully based on these assumptions. If you have an operator that wants to come in and contribute 40% instead of the other, then clearly it's all going to change. But we have to have some way of assuring the people that we're on target, the money's going to be spent wisely, and we're moving forward. And if we can't complete all the segments, as Assemblymember Harkey said, because for some reason, whatever, something doesn't come through or we hit a snag and we can only, you know, we need to have some kind of decision-making, or you need to have some kind of decision-making and process to decide how we are going to phase that in. So we could talk for another hour about all of that, but I think the basic point is, you know, we need to have at some point in time more discussion on how we do that, because that will give the public greater confidence in you and that you are executing the plan well, and it'll also give them greater confidence in the legislature and that we're doing the kind of oversight we need to do to ensure that those taxpayer dollars are spent wisely.
If I may, I'd like to just make 2 points. In referencing your concern about being able to pay for it and profitability and so forth, the comment that was made by the gentleman from APTA, APTA is regional rail throughout the United States. It's Amtrak and the like. We can't even compare high-speed rail with Amtrak or any other similar system. They have entirely different technology. They do entirely different things. And I had an opportunity to sit with David Azima, who's the CEO of SNCF, the company that built the system in France, back when we were in D.C. in the fall. And as he pointed out, the reason that California's system can be profitable, whereas the other states can't, we're the only system that's proposing the true high speeds of 220 miles per hour. And you need those speeds of 220 miles per hour in order to be able to compete with the airlines and take some of the traffic from the airlines. The airlines at some different points don't have the ability to expand anymore with additional runways and departure gates, but high-speed rail can accommodate that. Spain, for example, they have between 45 and 53% of the entire travel market share in different segments of their system. In France, one of their segments has over 70% of the market share. That's because they reach the true high speeds. And I also wanted to point out, secondly, that the Federal Railroad Administration asked certain global companies and countries to provide requests for expression of interest to the FRA, where they looked at California's plan, and I happen to have a copy of what was turned into the FRA by the company in France, and they actually show that California's plan will have revenue surplus, begin making a profit in the second year of doing business, and that's why they're interested in coming in and doing business with California. That's why Spain has an office here in Sacramento already. That's why the Japanese and the Chinese are here at all of our meetings. People are confident of California's plan 10 years away from the project being built out.
I have no doubt everybody's here. I understand that, you know, we look like we're a pot of gold, so I get why everybody's here. What I would like to see is the plans that they're offering if they're saying that they want to participate and they want. I'd like to see that plan, because that's the information we don't have here. Is at what level and under what conditions. We've got, the high-speed rail plan, which says no subsidies, no this, no that, but we're going to have cost sharing in our local communities, but we don't have the plan, the private piece that tells us under what conditions they're willing to enter. So if you have those, please share them. I'd love to see the plans that have been offered.
Just for the record, we've got cooperative agreements over the past 3 years in this chronological order: France, Japan, and then I think Italy and Spain, and then Germany, South Korea, China, and now you've got something on there for the next week's meeting from Belgium. Now, those cooperative agreements, in effect, give us free peer review. Obviously, if you're Germany or Spain, you're signing because you think you're going to have an edge at some point in the management of operation of the train. And I made a note of your point about getting something in writing. I don't know if I can or not. I'm going to ask our financial consultants.
Excuse me, I thought there was a plan or something that's been offered that, shows that, the commitment. I thought that we had a French firm or another firm that actually showed what their deal was.
No.
Assemblymember Harkey.
Okay.
Actually, there was an unsolicited, I can't think of what the term is, document that was offered to the FRA by the French system back in the fall, and I believe I have a copy of it, and I'll forward it to your office.
To the FRA.
That was a response to the RFEI.
Right.
I'm not going to belabor this point anymore because I have more questions myself, but I'll ask them at another time. So maybe we could move to issue number 2, staffing request, and cover maybe issue 2 and issue 3 together, program management contracts, because I think both of those are going to tie together as far as the questions we might have.
In issue 2, it was a discussion of the KPMG report and how it reconciles with the BCPs. I did mention that earlier in my statement as to we are working on a staffing plan and putting that reconciliation together, and should have it to your staff next week. Regarding the risk management position, that was not one of the positions that we identified as being part of our BCP request. It is in the KPMG report. In December, when our board approved the KPMG reorganization report, they identified 5 key positions that they needed to be filled immediately. They were the chief program manager, the chief financial officer, and 3 regional directors. It didn't include the risk management officer. We do have a consultant on board who is looking at the risk aspect of the authority, looking at the construction risk, the insurance risk. We do recognize that it is a key position within the authority, and we could redirect some of our resources and fill that position.
I have some questions.
It's very important. That's what I worry about, us not having people who are our fly speckers and report to us.
Well, actually, we share the same concern.
Yeah.
Okay. I read the KPMG report Monday night, and these are the conclusions I draw from the report. One is that you have inadequate management staff to drive the project and to provide the kind of oversight you need. Mm-hmm. 2, there needs to be what I would say state oversight of contractors and not contractor oversight of contractors, which is, I think, makes perfect sense. It's clear. I mean, if we're responsible for the taxpayer dollars, we should have that oversight position. I thought they made a very compelling argument for the risk management position, because in all that you've been saying in our conversation for the last 40 minutes, it's clear that we've got a lot of balls that we're juggling that are up in the air all at the same time. And we don't always know which one's going to land first, second, or third. And someone has to manage that overall risk so we know, which areas are moving forward as planned, which areas, we're running into roadblocks. I mean, instead of building a segment second, do we need to build a third and push someone else another segment up or whatever? But it's very clear to me, and they make it clear in the report, that the magnitude of this project is unique. These kind of projects are unique worldwide, and someone has to be there to manage that risk full time. And then the other points that were clear to me after reading the report is that there has to be some decision making in terms of what our management structure is and what you need in place to adequately manage the structure or the project both financially and operationally. But at the same time, there have to be decisions made as to what contracting out is most logically should be done through state agencies. One of the examples they gave was that Caltrans has tremendous experience in right-of-way acquisition. So the question is what's the highest and best use of other expertise that we have here in the state in terms of getting the project done in a timely manner. I just use that as an example. Okay. And which areas need to be contracted out privately. And again, it made the point, it was very clear over and over again that we shouldn't have one private contractor supervising another private contractor, that is not good. So when I read that and when I take a look at staff's analysis here, if I read this correctly, we currently have 13 approved positions, but my understanding is we only have 8.5 that are filled.
We have 11 positions that are approved,
All right.
and I've got 10 filled. We have the CEO is vacant currently.
And my understanding is the Department of Finance has authorized an additional 25 positions.
Correct. Those were administratively established beginning March.
Okay. And there is a bill in the legislature to provide, to allow some of those positions to be classified as exempt positions. And when I see this, when I'm reading this on page 12 of the analysis, is that AB 289 would likely convert the chief program manager, 3 regional directors, and the chief financial officer. Okay. Is that okay? So what I need for better decision making is to see that plan, the final plan that you have that's tied to the KPMG report, to know exactly what the responsibilities will be in those positions, to know when you're going to bring people online. I mean, if you need a manager in place in July, you probably have to start recruiting in January. So I mean, I think there needs to be a timeline there, and understanding what the functions are going to be. I know Department of Finance, you want to bring it up to the current business codes and everything else, but I don't see how you're going to be successful at all if you don't have the proper management in place. And my reading is I don't see how you will be successful without having a risk manager who can truly evaluate the project as it goes on an ongoing basis. So that for me, that's critical information to be able to approve the budget for you.
Okay.
I couldn't state it better. You've done an excellent job. Thank you.
This is bipartisan.
Either could I.
In action.
That's why we're asking.
I don't know if the LA or anyone else has any comments there.
I just would, may I, Madam Chairwoman, note that in the vaunted AB 3034, there's a specific provision which authorizes us to contract with Caltrans for right-of-way. They've been doing it 90, 100 years, and I've seen their work in court cases, and it's good, and in inspection, which also makes sense from the same philosophy that you articulated.
But part of your business plan, if you've got a good business plan, it can accurately describe what that management is. It can accurately give you what the roles of each are. I mean, I've always looked at a business plan, whether it's in the private sector or for me, I was involved in schools, but you know where you want to go. The business plan tells you the critical path and how you're going to get there. And then you have a periodic process for taking a look at that and updating it and deciding whether you're on target or not, or how you're going to adjust, whether you're adjusting finances or tasks. And so I think that's absolutely critical, as I said earlier, not just for us, but for you, because that will hopefully give the people of California greater confidence that we are going to have a train that goes somewhere.
We agree. Thank you.
Okay, so let us move on then to issue number 4, the contracts with other government entities.
We are in the process of doing our environmental review for 800-mile system, and that requires a lot of interaction and coordination with resource agencies, both at the federal and the state level. We have started to negotiate contracts with 5 resource agencies. Actually, it's up to 7 now, for them to provide staff services to be able to support the review of our environmental documents as they come into their resource agencies in order to expedite it through the approval process. The Peninsula Corridor Joint Powers Board coordination. We have a unique situation on the Peninsula Corridor between San Jose and San Francisco. We are sharing a corridor. They own the right-of-way along that corridor. We are looking at integrating their commuter rail with high-speed rail in order to provide a seamless electrified system both for commuter as well as high-speed rail. There's a Peninsula Rail program that's currently going on. The authority has an MOU with Caltrain to coordinate that work in that particular corridor. The Caltrans coordination, we have a lot of interaction with state highways up and down the state where we either cross or are adjacent to the existing freeway structures. There are cases where we may need to move the freeway or we will have to interface with them. So this is an agreement where we work with Caltrans. They oversee the work of our consultants that are making plans or designs for moving the freeway, making sure the impacts, the environmental impacts, drainage, whatnot, is not impacting the state highways. That's the extent of our state, other governmental agencies' agreements.
Any questions? Let me. My only question, and it ties with Caltrain. I mean, recently, if you read the papers, they're struggling financially, and I know there's also concern about whether or not high-speed rail should go all the way into San Francisco or not. How do we, I mean, with Caltrain struggling, given all the budget cuts we've had, how is
Well,
let me,
may I respond to that? To stop the system in San Jose would require voter approval. Proposition 1A and that Streets and Highways Code section, which was previously a part of AB 3034, says Los Angeles to San Francisco and several places. Now, number 2, Caltrain is a problem financially. Caltrain's ridership has tumbled, which surprised me. It frankly surprised me when the executive director made a statement about 40, 60 days ago. Caltrain for 11 years has a policy of electrifying. Because you electrify, you can boost the speed up to a maximum. For example, for us, it would be a maximum of 125 miles an hour, like it would be Anaheim to L.A., where you've got dense populations. So without high-speed rail, Caltrain's future is problematic. And there's a note in here someplace about what Caltrain is. I think somebody raised it in the staff report about their contribution toward this effort. Look, we can't be sugar daddies all over the state. And I can't give you an answer as to how Caltrain's going to turn out. They talk about, the basic claim is they have no independent funding source. You get a regional transit authority, it's got a funding source, usually a sales tax or a part of a sales tax, something like that. They don't have any. They get their money from San Mateo, probably about half of it. Santa Clara, probably a little over a third. And what does that leave for San Francisco? Maybe 14%, something like that. And each of these three county transportation authorities announces that it's cutting. It's transmission of money. And the rest, of course, comes from the fare box. And I haven't kept up with their fare box recovery, but let's say it used to be about 25% of expenses. So it's a problem.
I guess I would suggest that
we are the saviors. Pardon me.
I guess I would suggest that that's one of the reasons that we need the risk management position in place.
Yeah.
Because we have to be aware of what the what the risks are, and as we move forward, if we're going to actually bring the project.
Yeah.
We have one. Sure.
Just to clarify, Judge Kopp, hit on most of the points. Caltrain doesn't have its own operating budget. It does rely on the three transit agencies to fund its operations. Caltrain is not, destitute. It has some financial trouble, like all transit agencies in the state. It has an MOU with the High Speed Rail Authority. The purpose of the MOU is to ensure that Caltrain's existing commuter rail service can continue to operate while the High Speed Rail Authority, while the High Speed Rail is being constructed on Caltrain's owned right-of-way. So that's, the Caltrain contribution is the fact that the Caltrain owns that right-of-way. The partnership with the High Speed Rail Authority is necessary because there's staff at Caltrain that is working in partnership with the authority to ensure that the design and planning for the service on the peninsula can happen, and that Caltrain can continue to operate. And so the money in the budget is appropriate from our point of view, and that I just want to put that on the record. Thanks.
Senator Harkey.
I have a question for the gentleman from Caltrain. Caltrain, there's been a lot of publication lately about the problems with the local transportation. Caltrain currently serves commuter traffic?
Primarily, yeah.
Right. And it's cut back on its ridership, right, because of funding?
Well,
or will be?
I don't have the exact numbers on there on reductions of service. I would presume that with budget cuts that service has been reduced, and as a result, ridership is reduced, and it's a downward spiral. I could. If you reduce service to meet your budget, and then the reduction in service reduces the ridership, and the ridership reduces the operations.
So that goes to my point. So in essence, because of budget cuts and reductions in the state borrowing from all of the counties and the cities and the transportation dollars, and not funding local transportation dollars from the bond funds, we're defunding something that works, that is existing, that serves the commuter population, to build something in the future that may or may not. Okay.
It's just and from Caltrain's point of view on high-speed rail,
I understand the job switch. I do understand that. I'm just looking at the logic of all this. Thank you.
And the high-speed rail the improvements on the corridor will benefit Caltrain's ability to increase their service. With an electrified line, they will be able to move more trains at a reduced cost, and their ridership will go up. And so high-speed rail actually is integral to Caltrain's continued success and will reduce the risk of Caltrain having financial problems.
A point of information through the chair to Assemblywoman Harkey. The general manager of Caltrain has said that, in effect, unless it's electrified, it's going to go out of business. And it is looking to this project to pay a substantial part of that cost. I used to have that figure in my head. So I caution about drawing a conclusion that if it weren't for the high-speed rail project, the Caltrain would go on merrily forever. It won't, according to the general manager.
My only point in bringing it up is that there are a lot of moving parts in this project. Yeah. And it's going to continue to evolve, and it'll change. And hopefully at the end of the process, we'll all be able to hop on a train and be in LA in a couple hours. But, using Caltrain as an example, I know I've said this before, I think it clearly demonstrates the need to have a plan that the public can easily understand without trying to read through different documents to get little pieces of information that can be communicated clearly. There's a need to have a risk manager, someone who's evaluating this on an ongoing basis, because we don't know how many other little Caltrains there will be out there when you're trying to build a high-speed rail train that eventually will go from Sacramento to San Diego. Mm-hmm. And that's, makes it imperative upon you to have the right management team in place and to have the right structure in place to give the project, every opportunity to succeed. And I know that we're only a year and a half from when the voters approved it, but now that we have the $2.25 billion in ERA funding and we're starting to accelerate some of this, we need to know how all these pieces of the puzzle are going to fit together. So, and that's part of our due diligence, I believe, that we need to do as a legislature and as a budget committee here.
If I could respond on the Caltrain issue, I met with Bob Doty for over 2 hours the other day. He's the director of Caltrain. And the money in the ARA grant, part of it goes toward electrifying the track. Also, there's money for 5 grade separations along that corridor. And he's, as Michael Robeson said, firmly believes that that's going to allow the Caltrain to increase ridership and be successful. I also want to point out, too, something that as we look at the whole system, we talk about it being high-speed rail, but because of the federal requirement that we have independent utility for each of the segments that garnered federal funding, we're going to have regional rail improvements in each of the 4 segments. So, another way to look at it, it's regional rail today and high-speed rail tomorrow, because each segment will be utilizing the improvements, and in San Francisco to San Jose, Caltrain can run along our improvements. In the Central Valley, it will be Amtrak, and then in Southern California, Metrolink can use the improvements. So again, it's regional rail today, high-speed rail tomorrow, and I think it's important that we keep that in mind as well when we start thinking about, maybe because we're building a high-speed rail, we're taking away from regional rail. I don't think that we are at all. I think that we're making improvements.
Here's the data I was looking for. The cost of electrification is $785 million. According to Caltrain, the High-Speed Rail Authority would cover $516 million.
Okay. Well, I'm going to move on to issue number 5, which is the specialty contracts.
We have a number of specialty contracts. The visual simulation plan development, We use this as a planning tool. I know a number of individuals feel that this is more of a promotional tool, but however, it is really valuable for us to be able to demonstrate when we go out to the communities what the actual high-speed rail will look like coming through their community on an elevated structure, at grade, in a trench. We do photo simulations as well as video simulations. It has been very helpful in educating the public as to how it will look in their community. The ridership and revenue forecasts, as Judge Kopp had mentioned, we have commissioned UC Davis in concert with they're doing a statewide transportation plan with Caltrans to look at the statewide ridership in all various modes. And what our part of the plan will feed into the statewide ridership plan, showing the high-speed rail portion of it. Additionally, ITS, we've brought ITS on board. They are doing a peer review of our existing ridership model and data. And we plan on updating the data next year. Not necessarily the model. We stand behind our model, and we'll wait and see what ITS has to say. But basically, we feel our model has been validated. And the final specialty contract is a financial plan. We do have a financial plan consultant on board right now who has produced materials for our business plan. We are looking at contracting out for a new financial manager who would be more looking towards putting together the packages for the investors and attracting investors into the program.
Elliot, do you have any comments on this?
Our only comment, and this would actually go back to issue number 4 as well, with the Caltrain MOU and with the Caltrans MOU and with these contracts. We haven't been provided enough information to know if the amount of requested makes sense. What it ties to, why you need particularly exactly $1 million for the financial plan and public-private partnership program, or if it should necessitate more or less than that. So without that information, we really have no way to recommend approval of these requests.
Senator Harkey, do you have any questions?
Okay. That's being developed.
Yes. On the visual simulation plan, you're asking for $375,000 additional. So how much have we spent on that so far?
I'd have to look back at my records to see exactly what they have a $5 million contract. I think in year 1 we were close to $1 million on that initial year because there was a number of simulations. Let me see. Yeah. So in 6-7 we had $1 million, 7-8 was $565,000, 8-9 $422, and 9-10 is $260,000.
So this is $5 million to an outside contractor who's going to do this for us, or
the $5 million is a not to exceed. It's not necessarily we're going to expend up to the $5 million. It's really based on task. So when a certain issue comes up, let's say in the peninsula or in the Los Angeles basin, where we need to demonstrate here's what the station's going to look like, here's what the grade separation is going to look like in your community, we can task them with that duty. We don't just give them a blank check and say, here, this is it for the year. It is by task.
And don't engineers use programs already that will do that kind of modeling for you and show you what happens if you change grade separations or you move a line already?
Yeah,
I know Caltrans uses.
They do, and it really depends on the level that you want. If you want just a plan and profile, yes, your engineers can do that. But if you want something that's a little more clear and can really demonstrate the impact it's going to have, that's why we hired this one outside contractor, because it shows a consistency across the board for the whole entire state instead of a hodgepodge for each consultant. Additionally, none of our regional consultants have this built into their budget to do visual simulations. So either we do it this way or we put it into the regional consultants and have them do it individually.
So I'm just curious then. They're doing simulations, but you also have engineers that are going to be designing. What are the engineers doing? Using
They do the
in their
plan and
simulations?
profile. They do the on the paper.
They don't use any kind of software to do that kind of simulation. I thought that was pretty standard.
We haven't asked them to do that as far as in for public information. They do the engineering drawings for the authority and the project.
A couple other comments. The ridership revenue forecasts, I just look forward to seeing those, because what's clear to me is that, the initial forecast was sort of a worst-case scenario for environmental purposes, which clearly is not the most likely scenario for an operational budget or to attract, your public-private partnerships, because they're forecast, two different forecasts that you're using for two different purposes. So I'm just looking forward to.
And I think you see some of that in our business plan now,
We
is
do
where
see
we've
some-
moved
right.
away from.
And in your updated
Yes.
addendum, we see that, and I look
Yes.
forward to, seeing what happens with UC Davis, and you said, and UC Berkeley and the other peer reviews there. Are you doing any kind of surveys or focus groups or anything like that to determine what people would pay for a service like this?
Not currently, no.
No.
Because the assumptions I've seen, it just assume that if it's this percentage of the airline fare, you'll get this ridership. If it's Y percentage, you'll get another. So I'm just curious as to, are you doing any other kind of
Never thought of that.
validation there?
Yeah, never thought of it.
Actually, the addendum
Check
to
'em
the
out.
December 15th, 2009 business plan talks about what the ticket fare prices are in comparison to airline
Right.
tickets, the percentages. So that's kind of outlined. Ours are pretty much in line with what other countries have done. France is something in the neighborhood of 70 to 80% of an airline ticket. And it's, it will come down to political decisions when we decide what the costs are, because, if we made a determination to have a greater public benefit because we were in good financial position, then we could afford to charge 50% of an airline ticket, as was suggested in the 2008 business plan. But what they did in 2009 is they looked at another scenario of 83% of an airline ticket, because in the event that we didn't have as much money as we thought and we didn't have the money for as much infrastructure, then we could charge more and have less ridership and therefore less need for infrastructure. So those variations are there to give us the flexibility at the time we need, but we are in line with other countries.
I read that and I understand it. I just was wanting to know if you were validating it in any way by, doing any kind of surveys or any other focus groups or anything else to say, okay, if the average airline fare is $150 to get from here to LA, would you be more likely to ride the train if it were $75 or $100 or some kind of consumer information that you're gathering?
Madam Chair, my understanding is when the original model was put together for MTC and the High Speed Rail Authority, Cambridge Systematics, they went out and did a stated preference survey. They surveyed a number of individuals that in all different modes, and had, from that data is what this ridership model is based on. So the data has been discovered, but it was a number of years ago, and I believe that with the updated ridership model, part of the plan of UC Davis work is to get more information and update that data with more relevant, more recent information.
That's good to hear, because in the other countries, and I love taking rail in other countries, but people are used to doing that. That's just part of how they live, whereas we're used to hopping in our car or hopping on a plane. And I guess that's all of the real the detailed questions I have now. Again, I would just, the more I look at this, the more I see the need to have risk management that's part of your management team, because that deals with someone who's taking a look at how the funding's coming together, the revenue forecasts, the P3 program and all of that, and I think it's critical to have that. in-house, and I think it's critical that we be paying that person's salary and not a consulting firm. So, any questions?
No, I think you've summed it up very well, and thank you all for your comments.
And is there any other, before we adjourn, is there any other public comment? Well, we'll be reasonable, but keeping in mind the hour.
Hi, my name is William Grindley, and I live in Atherton. Last Monday, I was again in Sacramento, and when Assemblymember Galgiani stood in front of the Capitol and said, not in front of the Capitol, in the Capitol and said, quote, "Not every country has a high-speed rail system that was intended to be profitable. Our transportation system here in California was never intended to be profitable."
Excuse me, I've been told you're not allowed to sit on the dais, so.
You can stand there at the corner.
Or can we, actually, can we make room for him at the table, maybe?
Oh, sit here. Good, okay. How do I get to the mic?
We have 2 mics here. I apologize.
Shall I start again?
Yes, thank you.
Monday last, on the 19th, Assemblymember Galgiani here in the Capitol said, "Not every country has a high-speed system that was intended to be profitable. Our transportation system here in California was never intended to be profitable, but largely those that were intended to be profitable have been profitable." On hearing that statement, it seems to confirm the authority's 2008 bragging rights about its profitability and confirm the provisions of AB 3034 that no operating subsidy shall be granted to high-speed rail because none is needed. On the other hand, that quote came in response to a no answer by a rail expert of 30 years responding to Assemblymember Nolby's question on whether he knew of a high-speed rail system that was profitable, and he said no. Now, you have every right to be confused. I was. Page 83 of the authority's 2009 business plan, they earned $370 million in their first full year of operation. Yet less than 20 pages later, the authority starts the first of 5 calls for a revenue guarantee that is a taxpayer bailout, clearly in violation of the law you passed less than 2 years ago. So why are you keeping this authority on life support? From a private sector investor's point of view, if this train were such a great idea, California's equity investment community would have been flooding Sacramento with all kinds of loans before the equipment salesmen from Siemens, the French, and the flavor of the month Chinese were here. But real investors have to use real money, not free money or subsidized money, to keep California's economy humming. And they're not here, and they're not likely to be. That is, unless you give them a revenue guarantee. Please, no revenue guarantee.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I'm Russ Peterson with the Community Coalition on High-Speed Rail. We represent over 2,000 citizens from Belmont to Sunnyvale, and I'd like to make a request through the budgeting process that you seriously consider budgeting for a management team to develop a high-speed train project as you've kind of focused on. The reasons for this, and people that make up our group there are 2 types. One is the folks that are for high-speed rail and highly skeptical of what plans they've seen, and people are against it on the peninsula mostly that are extremely skeptical of these plans. And the authorities taken numerous steps, made numerous efforts to kind of correct those problems, but they're not basically bearing fruit. The project management process is backwards. Normally, you design something and then fund it and then build it. The process we're in, we're continually playing catch up with designs and plans and funding and studies being after we said we're going to spend money on it. Berkeley's going to get involved with the ridership study. That's coming out after Cambridge comes out with their new ridership numbers. Again, backwards. I attended a local community meeting in North Fair Oaks along the Caltrain line. Despite continued outreach and budget for outreach, the folks in that area never heard of high-speed rail. It is a predominantly Hispanic-speaking area. Trans officials in Southern California, as you know, are seriously questioning the current plans that are designed to go through their area. Basically, what we'd like to propose is a way to get out of this. And that specific way would be to essentially fund a peer review committee that's in AB 3034. Have them give oversight to this group. They're asking for all these positions to be filled. The peer review committee of experts, not of promoters of high-speed rail, but of experts that building rail would make sense. An investment-grade ridership study. If the EIR is based on anything, it should be based on a system the size that we're going to actually need to build. And further, on the peninsula especially, they need to do some greater effort on route studies. They stick with the Caltrain corridor come heck or high water. There can be better routes. There are experts that have said that there could be better routes, and I think they should look at that. I made thousands of notes listening here. This is, I don't know, one of a dozen meetings I've gone to on this. And basically, we're making these proposals basically to get to a point of success. Okay, whether you're for or against it, it's a lot of money. We're trying to make it successful. And so far, even after the proposition passed, we still have promises of doing better, of getting more information. We just like to see what that information is, because people are getting frustrated by not understanding what it is they're doing, and the folks here representing high-speed rail authority, et cetera, have basically said that information is going to be there. When? We're just looking for some experts in management oversight, funding expertise, and as you point out, risk management. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is James Jans. I'm a former two-time mayor of the city of Atherton, two-term council member, 10 years on the planning commission there. I'm also a former civil engineer and licensed certified urban planner, and I've spent the last 30 years as an attorney practicing land use and real estate law in San Francisco. I started, when I was mayor in 2003, the Atherton Rail Committee, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Atherton Rail Committee. I'm also a member of the Community Coalition on High-Speed Rail, which Mr. Peterson represents here today. And actually, I'm also a dues-paying member of the Planning and Conservation League, and I have some comments from them, which I will get into shortly. The High-Speed Rail Authority is going through additional and louder criticism from public and sources and newspaper editorials. The business plan, both the original plan and the addendum, have been criticized as being inadequate by the LAO, by the Planning and Conservation League, by numerous rail groups, by the Community Coalition, and again by the public and the press. The program level EIR EIS for the Central Valley to the Bay Area was decertified pursuant to court order. The authority just issued and just received comments on its revised draft program EIR materials, and we're looking for the authority's response to the comments on that. The total cost projected right now is $45 billion for this project. Now, no one really believes it's going to be built for $45 billion. As Assemblymember Harkey stated, pointing to things like the Big Dig, or one might look at the Bay Bridge, big public projects always wind up costing by factors of 2, 3, 4 times what they're projected at. But even if it's $45 billion, the authority has about $12.2 billion, it sounds so far, including ARA funds, which were not envisioned at the time the concept was started at the state level. Where's the rest of the money to come from? One of the things we've heard suggested is the need for ridership guarantees. These are all macro concerns. What does that mean in terms of the budget that you're looking at today? Gary Patton is an attorney that represents the Planning and Conservation League, and he also represents the Community Coalition on High-Speed Rail. He has prepared a letter which was apparently was not sent to you today, so I have 9 copies of it there. So I will give that to you now and ask that you take a look at it later. I'm just going to briefly go through 5 bullet points out of that letter, which are on page 3 if you want to take a look at it. And this is how we tie the macro issues down to what we're dealing with here. Speaking from Mr. Patton's letter on behalf of the PCL and the CCHSR, we urge you to consider the following points. The authority has done an excellent job in promoting the idea of a new high-speed rail project for California. Promoting a project, however, is different from designing and building a project. There are incredibly difficult details to deal with, and the authority and its staff are not equipped to deal with them. That's the discussion of personnel and employment. And the authority has consistently demonstrated that it wishes to solve problems by denying they exist, rather than by doing the hard work necessary to find workable solutions. The California High-Speed Rail project would be the biggest public works project in the history of the state, proposed to be carried out during one of the most tumultuous and uncertain economic periods in the state's history. To be successful in carrying out the high-speed rail project, California needs to do it right. That doesn't mean turning over $9 billion of borrowed money to consultants, supervising consultants, and again, we've heard from the KPMG report that that's not a good idea. Having considered these points, we urge the legislature to take the following actions. The legislature should use the remainder of the 2009-10 fiscal year seriously to explore ways to transition responsibility for implementing the high-speed rail project away from the authority, and to place responsibility with a state agency with expertise in building and operating major transportation projects. We might suggest the Business Transportation and Housing Agency. And secondly and finally, that the legislature should also use the remainder of the 2009-2010 fiscal year seriously to explore ways to get a high-speed rail operator involved in the process at the earliest possible time. We have a lot of interest from French, Spanish, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, etc. operators. We'd like them to be involved in the planning process right now to help this project be done right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we have one last speaker. Two.
Still say it's good afternoon.
Thank you.
I'll make it very brief. I've submitted a letter, which I think all of you have. So if I could make a very brief comment. I represent the cities, I'm Ravi Mehta, I represent the cities of Palo Alto, Atherton, and Menlo Park. I'll just read one paragraph, and then if I could ask that the letter be submitted into the record. We all understand that the approximately $2.25 billion in ARRA funding is a motivating factor for the authority's decision to move forward quickly. But we cannot have the tail wag the dog. We can't have the $2.25 billion dictate how the $45 billion project will be designed and built. We can't have the comparatively small ARRA funding override all of the CEQA mandates. We can't have the time schedules connected with the ARRA funding destroy the communities. We can't have the ARRA funding put us in a position of ignoring or breaching our fiduciary responsibility to the citizens of the state who expect us to spend the $9.5 billion wisely or not at all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair and Member, Jo Linda Thompson, Association for California High-Speed Trains. Very, very briefly, we support the budget of the authority. One concern we have as the engineering community, there's 700 engineers working on this now. Last year, because of the budget delays, they weren't paid for 4 months. They paid their own payroll. They made it through. I don't know that that's doable this year, and we're really concerned because we've got a tough deadline and an aggressive schedule. And a little bit of hope I brought with me today. I'm sure the authority is aware of this. I was really not. But I guess over 100 members of the House of Representatives have written to President Obama and asked to put this high-speed rail project, all the intercity projects, into the transportation reauthorization bill that's starting through Congress. And we are starting a whole grassroots movement here to try to get $4 billion more in funding for the high-speed rail than 2011. So it's very competitive. Midwest, Florida, Texas, they're all after it, but we're after it too. So I can leave that with you if you'd like. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just say that absolutely when people do work, they deserve to be paid. Unfortunately, that's a little bit out of the we only will approve, we will approve the budget, and it'll be up to the treasurer and to be able to sell the bonds and the controller to write the checks, so.
I know, we're sort of going one day at a time.
That's right, hopefully that will improve. I want to thank everyone, and this meeting's adjourned.